Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is David Logan. I'm the chair of the British Institute at Ankara. Welcome to you all. Before we start, I wonder if I could make a few points about the organisation of this evening. The first is clearly, if you could you turn off your mobile phones? The second is, as you will see, there's a big pull-up here for Research Turkey, who are our partners in this venture, and we owe them a debt of gratitude, which I'd like to express here. The third point is that all this session, both this opening remarks and the Q&A session, is on the record. We're not following Chatham House rules here at all. The fourth point, I think, is that actually when we come to the speeches, what is going to happen is that we will have our four speakers speaking for up to 10 minutes in opening remarks. And here's our fourth speaker. Hello, Soli.
Soli.
Hoş geldiniz.
Soli bavulla geliyor. Soli bavulla geliyor. Sorry.
Hi, Soli. So we're going to start off with our four speakers speaking for about 10 minutes each, and then that should give us about 50 minutes for questions after that. When we get to questions, again, because this is all on the record and being recorded, please, however loud you think your voice might be, wait until someone brings you a roving mic, because that's essential for those purposes. And perhaps this shouldn't be the last point, but you are, of course, extremely welcome to join us for a drink afterwards in the room just along there. You all know the title of this event, and we've got four extremely distinguished speakers about whom you've read in the flyer. Hikmet Çetin, on my left, was a member of the Turkish Parliament for more than 20 years. He was Deputy Prime Minister, he was Foreign Minister, he was Speaker of the Turkish Parliament, and he was, after he retired from Parliament, he was the senior NATO civil representative in Afghanistan. And there's actually a job which he did which isn't mentioned there, which was also pretty testing, which was he was my tennis doubles partner. I mean, not quite as difficult as dealing with the Taliban, but pretty irritating in its own way, I think. On my right is Jack Straw, who is well known, I'm sure, to most of you here. A member of Parliament for more than 30 years in this country. He was Home Secretary, Foreign Secretary, Lord Chancellor, and of course, Leader of the House. He has a particular connection with Turkey, I think. I think Jack would say that probably one of the most important things that he achieved during his time as Foreign Secretary was the start of Turkish accession negotiations to the European Union. It was a very important moment. It was a very important achievement. And although Turkish membership of the EU may now not seem an imminent prospect, it's one which I think that many of us on this side of the table would regard as an important objective which will benefit both Turkey and the European Union in the medium term. Quentin Peel, on my far left, is a senior fellow of Chatham House, as you know, and he was a very distinguished FT correspondent. He was head of the bureaus in Brussels, Moscow, Berlin, and then the chief foreign affairs editor. He also has a particular connection with Turkey. He was a member of the council of this institute, the British Institute at Ankara, and before he went to Berlin, and also has a special interest in Turkey, as well as enormous expertise on European affairs. Soli Özel, who has just walked in just in time, is a very distinguished academic expert in international relations in Turkey. He's a very well-known, high-profile television commentator. I meant before I came to look up the Turkish for contrarian, and didn't fail to do so. But I think it's absolutely true to say, Soli, that if you ask Soli for a point of view, you won't get just a conventional opinion. As I said, our four speakers are going to speak in turn, and we're going to start with Hikmet Çetin on my left.
Starting me?
Is that all right?
Okay, no problem. Thank you very much, David. It's my pleasure to be here tonight and try to say a few words about Turkey-UK relation, EU, and last Turkish election. Well, the UK and Turkey, two countries, two allies, which have long historic relation dating back to the 16th century. The United Kingdom was one of the first countries with which the Ottoman Empire established regular diplomatic relations. For example, the first resident ambassador appointed by the UK to the empire, William Harburn, assumed his duty in Istanbul in 1583. And Yusuf Ağa Efendi, appointed as the Ottoman ambassador to London in 1793. Not only that, because he was the first resident Ottoman ambassador ever to be posted to foreign country. Sultan Abdulaziz visited Britain in 1867 as the first Ottoman Sultan visiting Western Europe. There are so many first things between UK and Ottoman Empire and Turkey. King Edward VIII paid visit to Turkey in 1963 as the official guest of President Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. The relations have widened and deepened in the subsequent centuries, not only on bilateral issues, but also on the regional and international issues as well. Turkey's relationship with UK is not one affected by changes of government in Turkey. In every government we had always good relation with UK. Our long-standing relationship is qualified as a strategic partnership today. The 2010 strategic partnership document, which was signed during the Prime Minister Cameron's visit to Turkey in July 2010. The ambassador will remember that. Constitute a roadmap laying out a wide range of concrete areas of cooperation to strengthen the strategic partnership between Turkey and UK. It is deep-rooted, steady, multifaceted, and characterized by strong bonds of friendship. And of course, we have academic programs on Turkey, politics, and history are flourishing in the UK, especially in recent years. Exchange programs contribute to development of bilateral relations as well. Moreover, recently, I think there is a trend in recent years that many British citizens have begun to settle in Turkey, especially in coastal areas in the west and Mediterranean parts of Turkey. The number is increasing very rapidly. I think the ambassador will know, and you will know maybe better than I do. It has been a relationship remarkably immune to different challenges over time. Well, I think look in contrast to a growing number of other capitals, our ambassador in London has not been called in for consultation. Because we have many recently to call in for consultation, but the exception is UK. Let me say a few words about European Union. You all know very well that membership to the EU is a very strategic choice for Turkey. It is also important to reiterate a basic fact. Turkey accession negotiations started in 2005 during UK presidency. Because when I was foreign minister also, when we had any problem with the European Union will always call UK. They will try to find a solution many times in those difficult days. Even I remember that the Foreign Secretary Jack Straw's statements, which is unforgettable one for me personally. I quote, "Europe's border is Turkey's eastern border," which is, I think, unforgettable and very historical statement that His Excellency mentioned that time. This support for Turkey EU membership aspiration is recognized and highly appreciated by the Turkish people. It will not be forgotten. UK committed to advancing the clear case for Turkish membership of the European Union, championing Turkey's accession process and support Turkey to meet the accession criteria. In line with this commitment, I believe that the continuation of UK government's strong and visible support is important to reinvigorate the accession negotiations. But this will not be easy because UK has its own difficulties in its relation with the EU, and those are not easy issues to tackle. Because while we are asking always the UK relation, support for EU, but now UK will go to have a referendum very soon, and we would not know what is going to happen. Well, our last government, well, they say AKP, has not invested much in this process recent years. Government discourse via the EU has been largely negative. The EU has become a subject for the Turkish government, to engage in its anti-Western discourse. EU and some member states, on the other hand, have not been encouraging either, sending the wrong message to the Turkish people, Eurosceptics in Turkey, and anti-Turkish segments within the EU circles have strengthened each other. The latest episode is the progress report of the European Parliament, highly critical of Turkey. Turkish government has reacted tersely, I quote, by returning the report unopened. I don't know what does mean, of course, but this is what's happened. The report itself is to the point in most of its criticism, but it stands on the Armenian issue, and its call regarding accession negotiations are not helpful at all. The generally negative atmosphere of Turkey-EU relation in recent years has resulted in a fall of support for EU membership. What happens in regard to the EU in the short run will depend on the composition of the next government in Turkey, which is very important and critical for us. Because CHP is my party and HDP, I will call it HADEP, are firmly committed to Turkey accession to European Union. MHP, at least, is not opposed. In short, in regard to the EU-Turkey relation, we are in a better position today than before June 7. Turkey-EU accession with full membership would contribute to its century-long efforts for modernization and westernization. UK's support for Turkey has always been strong and consistent. EU supporters in Turkey know this and appreciate very much. Well, of course, as I have said before, there is, however, an element of parody, even irony here today. UK itself is going to a referendum as to whether to stay in or to get out of the EU, but wants Turkey in the EU. Still I have time for it. Let's say a few words. I think this is maybe you are waiting for that, how I will say a few words about Turkish election. We came to such juncture after parliamentary elections in our countries, UK and its election on May 7. We had ours on 7 June. Now elections are over in both countries. In the UK, election gave the Conservative Party the opportunity to form a single-party government. On the other hand, well, as the Conservative Party has a majority in the parliament, it may not feel entirely confident to pursue certain policies, particularly when it comes to the relation of the UK with the EU, due to the presence of Eurosceptics. In Turkish elections, electorate grew by 3.5 million new voters in the last election, until the High Election Board makes the official announcement. The provisional results are AKP, the governing party, has 40.9%, CHP 25%, MHP 16.3%, and HDP 13.2%. The AKP, which has had a total lack on Turkish politics since 2002, lost its parliamentary majority, but still remains the largest political party, 40.9%. The election was a defeat for both President Erdogan and the Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoğlu. The outcome also means Erdogan's desire to change the constitution, to transform country from parliamentary system into a presidential system. And in addition to this main issue in the election, of course, I think that was number one point that had important effect on election. Of course, corruption scandals, authoritarianism, Islamization, economy, foreign policy, mainly the Syria policy, galvanized a disparate yet increasingly powerful opposition during the election campaign. Of course, there is now a window of opportunity to restore democracy and the rule of law in Turkey. There is also a new opportunity to overcome societal polarization and to restore the institutional infrastructure of the country, which is very, very important because too much divided country in recent years. Depending, of course, on the makeup of the new government, there is a possibility of resetting of Turkish foreign policy, which is very, very important for not only for Turkey, for the region and beyond the region. It is so critical and so important. In the election, what we call it HDP, HDP is the major winner of election, 13.2%. And AKP, the main loser, down from about 50% to 40%. As far as the percentage is concerned, they lost 18% and more than about 70 seats compared with the previous election. Of course, when we look at the election result, we can argue that Turkish youth mainly voted for the HDP, I think, influence of Gezi movement as well. This is very important. I think they mainly voted for HDP compared with other parties, and punished Erdogan and AKP for their anti-democratic tendency, especially and growing in the recent years. June 7 also showed that Turkey's Kurds withdrew from the AKP and voted for HDP. Why is that? Because Erdogan's positive stance towards the ISIS at the beginning, of course, during the clashes, and during the clashes in Rojava, in Kobani, and his U-turn in the solution process affected Kurds' choice in last election. Because, for example, in my hometown, Diyarbakir is a good example. In previous election, the HDP was independent candidate. They had 5 seats out of 11 seats. But this time, they had 10. HDP had 10 out of 11. AKP only had 1 seat from Diyarbakir and 10 to HDP. Of course, CHP and MHP never exit even 1 or 2% in the region, unfortunately. By a strong twist of fortunes, the 10% threshold that made AKP a big winner in the 2002 elections, because Soli will remember in 2002, with 34%, they had over 65% seats in the parliament. With 34%, more than 65 seats in the parliament. Now, that system became its nemesis in 2015 election, with HDP making into the parliament with 13% and gaining 80 seats, and thus preventing AKP from winning a majority of seats in the parliament this time. It's 10 minutes already? No, well, I just feel last for it. Well, this election once again revealed that the fact that 10% threshold is high and should be lowered for enhancing the democratic representation in my country. Finally, this election means a coalition, many formulas, or less likely maybe minority government. This is also one possibility. If none can be formed within 45 days after the president assigned the duty to the candidate in waiting, then Turkey could face early elections as well. This is why I think my intention that President Erdogan wished to have a new election before any change in the law in the parliament. Some in Turkey and abroad say that early election can be one of the Erdogan's tactical moves to restore his power again. But prolonged crisis will hurt Turkish economy, which is among the most fragile, with still high unemployment rate based on construction without production, marked with income inequality and high current account deficit. I think the party should be very careful and try to form a new government, but it's not easy because normally we expect that 3 opposition parties will come together and form a government, which would be a wonderful solution. But the problem is, of course, MHP and HDP has disagreed on main issue, how to resolve the Kurdish issue in the country. And this is the main problem for having the coalition among the opposition party. I better stop here. There will be a question. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Hikmet. I wanted to speak speak briefly about how the results of the process and the results of the referendum here on EU membership could affect the position of Turkey. And for reasons I'll explain, I think that it could work to the advantage of Turkey's ultimate membership of the EU. I just say that Hikmet was right to assert that about the abiding and close relationship between the United Kingdom and Turkey, and the fact that there is an all-party consensus behind that. So, for example, with Sir Julian Horne-Smith, who's in the front row, who's not a Labour politician but a businessman, but I, as a Labour politician, am co-chairman with Julian of the British-Turkish Forum, the Tatler Deal, which is the government-sponsored forum for British-Turkish relations. And there has never been any argument in the House of Commons either about our great support for Turkey's EU membership. And very interesting, given the fact that we find so much else to argue about when it comes to the EU. Let me provide some brief reassurance to Hikmet about the referendum. I mean, it arose from the Conservatives' manifesto, and the position which my party leadership advanced at the last election was very strongly against having a referendum at all. But it will be noted that all four of the candidates for Labour's leadership very swiftly said that they're now in favour of a referendum on Britain's membership of the European Union. And what that reveals is that there was actually significant support for a referendum inside the party, but the party leadership had decided against it. And my own view, which I advanced 3 years ago, was that when the idea of a referendum was current, then we should go for a referendum and try and have it in the last Parliament, not in the next, and certainly not have it as an election issue. Why do I say that as someone who very strongly supports our membership of the EU? Because it's become an issue in Britain. Our relationship with the European Union, for all sorts of reasons, very different from that of continental European countries, and our membership needs to be re-legitimised. In any event, it's going to happen. It is possible that Mr. Cameron comes away empty-handed from his negotiations, and in which case he recommends that we should withdraw from the European Union. If that happens, there'll be a very intense battle between the pros and the antis. I suspect that the pro-Europe vote will still win, but only by a narrow vote. What, however, I think is much more likely is that Mr. Cameron will be able to gain some concessions, whether they're in terms of the practical way the EU operates or in terms of the treaties is open to doubt, less likely in terms of treaty changes. But what he will be seeking, and what I think Germany and the other continental countries will be anxious to offer, is a slightly looser arrangement with the European Union and a greater recognition of the fact that for a whole host of historic reasons, Britain is in a slightly different position from the rest of Europe. And the fact, for example, that we are a common law country, not a civil law country, I say as a lawyer, has caused immense difficulties inside the European Union. Simply getting the European jurists to understand we have a different system is very difficult, even for the most committed European. The fact that there is a religious difference, which is that many in this country see quite correctly part of the conception of the European Union as reflecting the way the Catholic Church has operated. Subsidiarity, for example, is a very Roman Catholic conception. And although there are plenty of Roman Catholics here, this is a country which is dominated by a Protestant church with the Queen as a supreme governor of the church. So there are these differences, and they will need to be taken better account of in the negotiation. And the result of that may well be that there will be restrictions certainly on the right to benefits, and a greater accommodation of Britain maybe going its own way in other important respects, and being allowed derogations and opt-outs. Now let me come to Turkey. I'm struck by, and you can take these parallels too far, but by some similarities between Turkey and the United Kingdom. We're part of Europe, but we're on the edge of Europe. We've both had empires and are coming to terms with post-imperial life. Turkey, of course, has a distinct dominant religion, which is Islam, but don't ignore historically the difference between Protestantism, the dominant strand of Christianity here, and that of Catholicism in Europe. And also, I just happen to say, we've both on our fringes got really difficult ethnic groups, some of whom are trying to break away. But Turkey seems to have been more successful so far at accommodating them than we here, so we've got a lot to learn. So, in part of the debate about Turkey's future, there's been some fancy talk from people, particularly in continental Europe, about how there should be an association agreement with Turkey, but never a full membership. That's never been acceptable to Turkey. It's basically condescending and patronising to Turkey, and Turkey, quite rightly, wants full membership or nothing. But I have always been struck that because of the distinctive nature of Turkey, what it really would want is full membership, but of a slightly different kind, with slightly looser arrangements. And this is why, this is my last point, David, before we take the other speakers and move on to discussion. I think that Turkey should pay very close attention to the negotiations that Mr. Cameron and Mr. Hammond will be holding, and see whether or not from this they could not adopt a model of membership similar to that of the United Kingdom, which would make it easier for Turkey to join, and easier for other member states to accept Turkey into membership.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon. My apologies for being late. That's not the way I am usually. Now, was I invited then as a contrarian? You see, as I have very few dark hair left, I think I should be more, but then I remember that, some of very white-haired people in this country finished their lives as contrarians, E.P. Thompson, Tony Benn, and others. So I'll try to be contrarian. Well, I want to start with two things, and I'll compare Britain and Turkey. I remember Secretary Stroh received TÜSİAD's Bosphorus Award years ago, and at that time, our former president, Abdullah Gül, was the foreign minister. And whether that, I suppose that was also the reality, they did have a very visibly fine relationship, the two of them. They may not have agreed with one another, I don't know their story, but at least there was genuinely warmth between them. It is, in my judgment, a sign of where Turkey is today vis-à-vis Europe that I don't believe any of our cabinet members, let alone our foreign minister, can claim that kind of intimate or at least warm relations with any of their counterparts. And that is, in my view, perhaps not just Turkey's fault, but also continental Europe's behavior towards Turkey. And I think it's unfortunate. Unfortunate not just because I personally am in favor of Turkey joining the European Union, that may not exist, but also because whatever the relation, the nature of the relation between Turkey and the European Union, you really need to have lines of dialogue open and a common vocabulary that both sides could actually use. Because given where the trouble spots of the world are and given where Turkey is, I really don't think the Europeans can afford not to take Turkey seriously. And whatever we may think at home, I don't think Turkey can actually do things on its own either. The first academic paper I have ever written was entitled "Of Not Being a Lone Wolf." And I was alluding to a comment made as early as 1952 by one of our diplomats by the name of Bülent Nuri Eren, who said, "Turkey is a lone wolf without instinctive friends or allies." And I think the default position of Turkish foreign policy has always been that, whether it was under the Republicans or Kemalists or now with the AKP. But on the other hand, at least the founders of the Republic also appreciated that Turkey had to have a constructive role to play in the world order. Now, before I come to our relations with Britain, Britain, of course, I wish it were as our relations with Britain, our psychology with Britain was as rosy as the minister presented. On the one hand, this is a country that has a saying, if you're going to be hanged by a British rope, because that really meant quality. On the other hand, behind every problem we always see Albion. And sometimes this is more, how shall I say, expressive, and at other times it may be more subtle. Now, this time around, those of us who were wondering what the results of our elections would be looked at Britain again, and of course your pollsters failed you. Now, I personally wanted to believe that we would have a four-party parliament, and when I was asked, I could not say, yes, we're going to have a four-party parliament. Why? Because in Britain the pollsters failed. Thankfully, in our case, the pollsters almost got it right, and we do have a four-party parliament, which I think changes, as Minister Çetin expressed, it broke the lock that the ruling party had on Turkey, and it gives us an opportunity to actually reflect on our current situation and perhaps begin to redefine our identity and redesign our path. Because whatever else it may be, the current government's foreign policy, especially as it drifted away from a European Union that did not want of Turkey actually, compared to 2010, 2011, shows quite distinctly a perilous failure. A failure is one thing, but a failure that actually causes a lot of dangers to the country is another. And I think Turkey's problems in that sense, what's happening in the Middle East, are one way or another problems of the European Union as well. Now, Britain, of course, threatens the European Union with exit. If Turkey ever said, we want to leave, I really don't think the Europeans would say, no, please stay. Although I was at a conference lately, and a British official gave comments and basically was like very nonchalant about Britain leaving Europe. And a German respondent to his words was like, are you really sure? And it's as if Brexit, just one letter. And it may not really make it. I really don't know what the real sentiments were. And in the Turkish case, of course, Turkey looks like a burden, and I really don't think it is. It isn't, but in their current relations, those relations are not really very functional. In fact, they are pretty dysfunctional. The difference between the UK and Turkey today, although yes, they both had empires, they lost the empires. In your case, Britain lost an empire, is looking for a, what? Role. In our case, we lost an empire, we did not want a role, and now you seem to be drifting away from being a global power. This is at least how your parliamentary vote was interpreted and the decline in your defense spending. But Turkey, after having gone second league, let's say, is an ambitious country. It actually wanted to have a replay of, if not of empire, certainly a replay of domineering relations with its environment. And of course, that kind of ambition, unless you have the proper resources, and unless in the case of Turkey you also manage to use your other ties effectively and intelligently to pursue your goals, may actually turn on you. And I think this is what happened to Turkey's Middle East policy. Now, when Turkey really pushed hard for the European Union, the common refrain from those who did not particularly like the idea was like, yes, the British are supporting it, and in fact, yes, it was under British presidency that Turkey started negotiations, and both the minister and secretary and the ambassador were very active in promoting that. The idea was, of course, the Brits want Turkey in the European Union to further diffuse it, dilute it. Again, the Europeans didn't leave anything to others for dilution, I must say, as we see it now. But in a way, the two outsiders were seen as natural allies, especially in strategic terms, and their common guilt was, of course, their close relations with the United States. Now, of course, as I go to these conferences, I recognize that even the most anti-American Europeans are like, are the Europeans deserting? I'm sorry, are the Americans deserting us? Please don't, mode. And the Americans are responding, no, we really don't want to desert you, but, why don't you spend some more money on your defense? And that, of course, again, in terms of both population that can actually be used for defense purposes, military purposes and whatever, really puts Turkey in a critical position. For a European Union that absolutely needs to have a strategic orientation, but has proved itself incapable of coming with one. And that means the institution in which both Britain and Turkey are members, NATO, almost in spite of itself, will have to bear another responsibility, perhaps coordinate some of its political relations with the European Union to come up with a framework. In my judgment, and I'll stop here, Britain can help Turkey to find the proper way of discussing with the European Union its problems, how to coordinate and how to cooperate despite the fact that the membership issue is not going to be tomorrow's issue. And I think it is in Europe's interest to give Turkey a helping hand when the drift in Turkish foreign policy is poisoning Turkey's domestic identity. And my argument would be a Turkey that does not have a pluralist identity, a Turkey whose identity has become just a Middle Eastern or just an Islamic identity, is going to be a Turkey that will never be able to fulfill its own ambitions, but it will also be, in my judgment, both a strategic and political challenge for a European Union that but God knows has a lot of other challenges to deal with, against which Turkey could actually be of great help.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Quentin.
Thank you, David, and thank you very much for inviting me. I will try to be brief because I know we want to get on to a discussion. I will try not to be too gloomy, although I must admit that I feel rather gloomy. I feel rather gloomy about both our countries, I think. We're both at a fairly critical moment in our political lives, and I think there are some very serious decisions we have to make, and in both cases it does indeed relate to our relations with the rest of Europe. But let me focus for the time being on Britain. Of course, the ironic contrast between Britain and Turkey's election results is that in Britain, David Cameron did not expect to win a majority and won it. And in Turkey, I think Mr. Erdogan did expect to win a majority and lost it. As a result, one might expect that the AK party in Turkey will be forced to tone down some of its policies in order to either survive as a minority government or in some form of coalition. Whereas David Cameron's problem is that he expected to have to tone down his demands and his policies, and in fact he's going to have to try to deliver them. And that's a very scary situation for him to be in, because he's in danger of being forced to make some rather foolish demands of his European Union partners. We are going to have a referendum. Jack Straw is rather sanguine about that prospect. I think it is a nightmare. It is a nightmare because it is not that obvious that this country will vote to stay in the European Union. And if it votes to leave, it'll just become an irrelevant little island off the coast of Europe. The last opinion poll, I think I was just looking in yesterday's papers, the Sunday Times had an opinion poll saying, well, on balance, the yes vote's in front, 42% yes, 35% no, and 20% don't know. That is not a very obvious situation. And what we have now in Britain is a Prime Minister, David Cameron, who's proved to be one of the most extraordinary risk takers that we've ever had in Downing Street. He took a huge risk by going ahead with a Scottish referendum, which he damn nearly lost. And now he's taking a huge risk by going ahead with the European referendum, which he could lose, and if he lost it, we'll probably then lose Scotland as well. This is what I mean by this country facing some very profound decisions. The problem is that David Cameron, in his negotiations with Europe, has got to please two totally contrasting constituencies. On the one hand, he has to please his own increasingly Eurosceptic Conservative Party and an electorate in Britain that is also disaffected with Europe, regards Europe as an unsuccessful project, the Eurozone crisis as something that actually means the British economy is doing the rest better than the rest. This is not true. It's only if you add all the Eurozone together it's doing better, but if we compare ourselves with Germany, for example, we're clearly not doing better. Nonetheless, there is a Eurosceptic mood abroad in this country, and that constituency is demanding a fairly radical change in Britain's relations with the rest of the European Union. But David Cameron is very unlikely to be able to persuade 27 partners in Europe to give him radical change in the European Union. He's probably going to be in a position rather like Harold Wilson was in the mid-70s, when he went to Brussels, got a few rather modest changes, and came home and presented it as a triumph. That way, he might have a chance of winning. But already, the Eurosceptics in his party are expressing grave doubts about this project and threatening to rebel against him. So it's by no means a foregone conclusion that he's going to get what he wants. And I think that would be very dangerous. For a start, as we've heard, Britain has always been a great supporter of Turkish membership of the European Union. Well, you wouldn't have us there any longer to be a great supporter of Turkish membership. You might very well not wish to join a European Union that didn't have another Bolshevik and semi-detached member like the UK. But if you did, you wouldn't have the Brits in there arguing for you. But there's another problem with this whole British debate that's emerged from the British election and that is now I fear, the dominant debate here. There is one issue more than any other that has dominated the debate and that David Cameron is scared of, and that is immigration. And the reason why that issue of immigration is now so toxic here, it's partly that it's been used by the anti-Europeans to stir up trouble, but it is a direct consequence of British policy on Europe. British policy on Europe was always that we wanted a wider, enlarged European Union. As Soli Özel just said, it was always suspected by our partners that we wanted a larger Europe because it would be diluted. And therefore, ultimately, we'd have Turkey in, and that would be the ultimate dilution. The problem is that the direct consequence of EU enlargement has been a surge in immigrants to Britain, and David Cameron is now put right at the top of the list of his demands to try and make some change in immigration controls in Britain that he can get away with in the European Union. Well, if Turkey were eventually to join the European Union, what is the most dramatic consequence of that? It would be free labour mobility for a very large Turkish population. So I must question the fact whether we can truly believe that the British are going to be such good allies for Turkey, certainly in Britain's present sad and rather Eurosceptic mindset. So that's one warning I would like to do, and maybe I'll just come back with one other. The problem of this particular British government, but British governments in the past, including occasionally, I fear, Jack Straw's, is that we don't listen very carefully to what our partners want. So David Cameron is going to Europe saying, I want to restrict immigration. That means I want to change the freedom of labour mobility in the European Union in some form. I want to discriminate. All the new member states of the European Union will totally oppose him on that. Then he says, right, I want a special deal on the Eurozone so that we can carry on defending the City of London. He's regarded with considerable suspicion on that score as well. You want a veto. And I heard a very interesting comment just 2 weeks ago from a senior German politician who said the following. He said, do you know, I have never known a British government that has been so careless of the geopolitical consequences of its actions as the present British government. We have in Europe a situation where we have number one priority, stabilise the Eurozone and keep it together and get growth back in the economy. Number two priority, sort out a relationship with Vladimir Putin in Russia so that we don't have a total confrontation on our eastern border. And probably priority number three, the Middle East, the flow of migrants across the Mediterranean, a real problem that we're seeing there that needs to be sorted out. And what do the British do? They demand renegotiation of a few, to their partners, quite frivolous changes in their relationship. He said it's quite extraordinary how irresponsible this British government is. And I think that's a danger, that's a lesson to be learned. A lesson to be learned is, in the European Union, you have to pay attention to what everybody wants in the Union. We see with Alexis Tsipras in Greece, he said, I've been elected to no more austerity. He can't get it through because he's paying no attention to what his partners want. David Cameron is saying, you've got to give me renegotiation because my electorate has said it. No, Europe is 28 different democracies, all working together. It's a very difficult creature to deal with. And for Turkey, 28 different democracies to deal with is also going to be very difficult because it means you've got to deal with the French, with the Germans, with all their different... It won't be just the Brits. It may not be the Brits at all. I'll stop there.
Very good. Okay, thank you all very much indeed for those provocative and stimulating comments. And who would like to ask a question? One over there. Two over there.
Bill Park, King's College, London. A very quick observation and then a question. The observation is about the relationship between the distribution of votes in the Turkish election and the distribution of seats. For the most part, in the bulk of the country, the AK Party vote dropped by less than 5% in most provinces. The only really big shift was in the southeast, where its vote dropped by 30-40%. And that's basically the reason why two things happened. One, the AK Party did not win enough seats to form a government on its own. And secondly, why the HDP went over 10%. So I think when we look at whether the AKP needs to tone down its language, actually, for the most part, other than in the southeast, it held enough votes to form a government. The problem, electoral problem, is the vote in the southeast from the Kurds. They got about 10% in Istanbul, Izmir, Ankara. That's not enough to change the government. It's the southeast that makes the difference. That's the observation. It has a connection to my question, which is if you look back at the history of the Turkish Republic since multi-party elections, for the most part, what we see is very fragile coalitions. I mean, the only really comparable period with AK Party rule is in the 1950s, and that ended in a military coup. What we've otherwise seen, other than the AK Party period and the Democratic Party period in the 50s, is very fragile coalition governments in Turkey. So my question is there any reason now to believe that we are entering into a period other than a period of endlessly fragile coalition governments that last for months, probably more than years? Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Well, a comment on your comment. If only we had the Turkish electoral system, UKIP would have got 80 seats, I suppose. Who's going to comment with it?
Maybe Soli this time.
First of all, Turkey had single-party rule governments between 1965 and 71, and then between 1983 and 1991. So, fragile coalition governments are basically the mid-1970s and the 1990s. I really don't think that coalition government is by definition bad. The 70s and the 90s, the fragility of the coalition governments had reasons because of those decades. In today, although I would agree with you in the following sense, we seem to have divided Turkey into four identities: Islamic identity, Kurdish identity, secular identity, and ultranationalist identity. Okay? And we seem to be shuffling around, and the distribution doesn't change. Politics of culture or identity trump politics of interest. We are just now beginning to break this, as we've seen in the strikes, where in provinces where the AKP always received a very high percentage of vote. The challenge now for the political system is to break away from this. Whether we'll be able to do it or not, I don't know. However, I think if we can use the current situation intelligently, we may actually use coalition governments for better. And just one disagreement with Mr. Peel. Mr. Erdogan didn't expect a victory. He wanted one. He wanted it so badly he could taste it.
I suspect David Cameron didn't want.
At one point,
Yeah.
well, I think we have one very good coalition government in 1991. Turkey had a lot of problems, but coalition until Özal Özal passed away. Mr. Erdal İnönü and Mr. Demirel, we had 3 years very good coalition, no problem at all. Within the coalition, we had no problem. And the first time that Demirel and Erdal İnönü went to Diyarbakır, they said, we accept Kurdish reality. It's too big party, which was very important at that time. The first time in the history of Turkey. Yeah. That many people would disagree with this, but that was very historical step at that time. And I think at this time we need a coalition that may work, of course. We had a lot of problem with one-party government, especially after 2007. And economy is doing very bad now. Rate of growth around 2.5. which cannot solve any of our problem. And foreign policy, of course, is terrible now. We have to restore our foreign policy. I think maybe you are not very much aware of what we have the problem with Syria now. Every day, thousands of people. And we became neighbor with ISIS now. We are neighbor with ISIS. And the other side of the border, the ISIS, and this side, Turkey. And we do not know how to deal with the issue. Because the international community did mistake as well. Because no one has, I discussed with many of them, no one has any policy after Assad. Still no one. I haven't heard any word about what will happen after Assad. Because the international community, mainly the US, is very good about the first stage, but not about the second stage. Look at Iraq. Saddam should go, but what happened now after Saddam? Gaddafi should go. What's happened after Gaddafi? And now we are saying that, of course, Assad should go. Yes, he should, but what will be the alternative? No one has alternative. And I think we need to work together with the European Union, with UK, with Europe, how to deal with that issue. Will have very bad effect on Europe as well.
Did you have a question, David? Okay, then over there. Over there. And then Bill afterwards.
David Redaway, working with Beko, a Turkish company investing in the UK. Could I ask the Turkish members of the panel, structural reform in Turkey is essential for long-term prosperity. It's essential for the EU accession process. And it's independent of that process. It can be put into effect by changing legislation, even though the accession process is largely blocked. And it's also essential for the consolidation of democracy in Turkey. Do you think, in the uncertain result of the latest election in Turkey, that the prospects of structural reform are good, bad, or indifferent?
Who's going to take?
Sorry, ben mi?
Ben cevap veririm, buyurun. Ben konuşayım.
Well, no.
A duet.
Sorry, you start with it.
Look, the way I see our election results is as follows. I'll be literary. In Fathers and Sons, there is a line. Turgenev writes, those first sweet moments of bliss, why can't they live on forever? So we had, or some of us had, their moments of bliss on June 7th. And of course, on June 8th, it was the morning after the night before syndrome. Okay, so quite frankly, we don't know where we're going to go. Even people who are on the same side of the divide do not agree which coalition or which governmental formation is going to be good. All I know is the following. That election rejected an attempt for regime change. That we tried to stop, and I think we managed to do it, but we just don't know where we're going to go. Okay. That means in the next 2 years at least, the presidency is likely to be the most important source of instability in the country. Okay. Therefore, my expectation is that the bureaucracy, because of the political turmoil, will have a freer hand to actually do day-to-day things. Central bank would be under a lot less pressure, and I think the foreign ministry will be a lot less pressure to pursue pipe dreams. Okay? But structural reform, major economic reform, don't expect those things, but we will be able to muddle through, I think.
Do you want to?
Well, I think one more thing is that just to addition to what Soli said, of course, before last election, HDP was considered to be mainly Kurdish party. But now I think it's been a major party of the country because they had 1 million votes from Istanbul. I think with the eastern and southeast of Turkey, they would never be able to pass 10% because they had 12.2%. I think it's 12.2% from Istanbul,
10% in Izmir.
and from Izmir, and with these two big cities, they could able to pass 10%. And they just, during the election campaign, I think they just never mentioned too much about the real Kurds and so on. They try to really concentrate on reforms, democratic reforms, and many other reforms in the country. As Soli said, of course, it was not easy. But one thing is very important. I would say one more again, that our people did not want to have the presidential regime like that Erdogan wanted to have it. This is very important, and I think they also have realized that they will never come back to talk about that issue anymore.
Thank you very much. Edward Mortimer from All Souls College, Oxford. I'm sorry, this is also a question for our Turkish friends. I think there's a structural asymmetry about this meeting, actually, because we're holding it in London, and most of us, rightly or wrongly, think we know more or less what's happening in this country, but we're extremely curious about what is happening and what is about to happen in Turkey. And I would really like to hear a bit more about the immediate situation now. To a British observer, it has a slightly slow motion feel. I mean, on the 8th of May, 3 party leaders in this country resigned. One of them then unresigned, but still. I don't know. I don't think anybody I've heard has resigned in Turkey. Has Mr. Davutoglu resigned? I suppose he will, but I would be interested to know, is that likely? What happens next, and when does it happen? When has the Parliament assembled yet? Does the President ask the leader of the largest party to try first to form a government? I would really be interested to hear a little bit more about the mechanics and the nuts and bolts of this very, very interesting phase of Turkish politics that we're just entering. Thank you.
We do not have that culture.
Are you going to?
Well, I think one is not more than that. Because my own party, leader of my own party, he said if he's going to have a less than the previous election, he will resign. And yes, 1% less. But he wants to be prime minister now. And well, Davutoğlu,
said the same thing.
The same thing. He said if he's going to not get the majority to form the government, he will resign. Now he wants to form a government. Only, of course, Demirtas has said that if he's not going to pass 10%, certainly he will resign, but it's already 13%. It's okay. And unfortunately, we do not have that culture in our country. I never know any example, I think. Soli, do you remember anyone that...
Well, Devlet Bahçeli resigned in 2002 only to come back a few months later.
After 1 week. Okay, you may say some words.
You want to say something?
Well, we really will have to see what these guys are going to do. And as I said, we have a process that will last till probably the end of July, unless we're going to have a snap election. The president, our presidents speak in the air, literally, on the plane, with accompanying newspapermen, mostly men, but women too. And the president said that if there are early elections, these should not be called early elections, but these should be called a repeat election. Now, the thing is, I never underestimate Mr. Erdogan. So when he uses a phrase that is not familiar, you really got to pay attention. And I think what he tried to do there was to give assurances to those newly elected deputies that if there is a snap election, you'll be on the list. But he has a circle to square to, and that is he absolutely must have understood that he needs the old guard, which he got rid of because of the 3-term limit. How he can actually pull these things together, I really don't know. But I do respectfully disagree with Minister Çetin on the following. Mr. Erdogan did lose a battle. He thinks he lost a battle, not the war. So the fight will continue. And if he pushes it too far, it's going to be very destabilizing. And the critical person is, I think, in all of this is Davutoğlu. Because if we're going to have a future in a parliamentary system and actually rewrite our social contract, the AKP will have to become more autonomous will have to gain some autonomy from Erdogan. It is now no longer the AKP, but it's Erdogan's party. Everybody has been handpicked by him, by and large. The provincial organizations have elected Erdogan loyalists, and among the AKP voters, the identification of the leader with their vote is the highest. So that is, it's almost 35% of the vote is Mr. Erdogan's personal vote. So Davutoğlu will have to make a choice. Does he continue with the very little step he took and said when he said, well, the electorate rejected the presidential system? Or will he again be subservient in order to protect his job because they have a party congress in August? Unless that distance is taken, coalition governments are not going to work either. And that I think is the critical, and he can decide that. The second person who would be consequential is Secretary Stroh's old friend, whose press secretary just published a book, My 12 Years with Mr. Gül. And that, of course, is a very serious indictment of what had happened in the last few years about the AKP. But Mr. Gül so far has not proven to be a risk taker. And so these are some of the unknowns. If they all pull together, we may have change. If not, Mr. Erdogan will prevail.
I've got a lot of questions. I've got Bill, one here. I want to take the groups of Bill and at the back together. But could I, before you both ask your questions, could I comment that the audience is giving our British panelists an extremely easy ride?
Very good thing.
Questions, would you embrace them to? I think that would be good for everyone. I'm just going to take those two questions for both Bill and then someone at the back there. Okay.
First of all, on the question of early elections, something that has to be borne in mind is that the average member of the National Assembly wants an early election like a hole in the head. And the reason is that elections cost an awful lot of money. And they even cost the candidate personally a lot of money. So he will do a lot to avoid that. In fact, the 45-day rule has been in force now since 1982, since the present election came in. There have been 3 elections since 1982 when no party has had an overall majority, and on no occasion has the 45-day rule had to come into action. In other words, before the 45 days were up, they agreed to some sort of coalition government. And my suspicion is that that is likely to happen this time, whatever Erdogan wants. But the question, for my mind, in the longer term is the one that Soli Özel was raising, which is, given that he can't now change the constitution in the way that he wanted to, will Tayyip Erdogan continue to be able to control the AKP from behind the scenes, unofficially, through his control over the party machine outside Parliament? That is the critical question, and I would like to know the Turkish members of the panel, whether they think the party organization in the country, how is it going to react to the present situation? Is it going to start regarding Tayyip Erdogan as more of a liability than an asset electorally, which would be a crucial factor? And secondly, what will be the position of Hikmet Davutoğlu in all this? Up till now, Hikmet Davutoğlu has had very little independent power. He was parachuted into the parliament. He doesn't have a long background in the party. There are other people in the party of much greater seniority than him. So it's difficult to imagine Hikmet Davutoğlu as Prime Minister leading a revolt against Tayyip Erdogan. But I'd like to have opinions about this. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Hasan Turunç, academic fellow at Oxford. Also, I'm TÜSAD representative in London. Can you hear me? My question is to Mr. Çetin. What's your strategy for the election of the head of parliament? Will you seek a coalition with other parties, or are you preparing to put forward your own candidate? And my just short question to Mr. Jackstraw. You were talking about model that Mr. Cameron is negotiating with EU. Can you please tell us a bit more? Because I know that the voting is tomorrow, but what else included in this model? Because immigration is one, and the second is red tape on the city. Is there another thing you think? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, can we take those two? So Bill's question to start with. Who would like to talk to?
Soli wants.
I already addressed. Go ahead. I will say a few words once you've done.
I think the repeat election, or I think one of the reasons that President saying that this is going to be a repeat election, maybe just came to my mind right now when I have to. There is about 70 members of this parliament. Most of them were founder of the party. And the decision was they could not become the member of the party after three times. But then they can come again. Now the problem will if they say that repeat election, they will say no, this is not a new election. This is just a repeat election, and will not give chance to like Bülent Arınç and many others. This is, I think, one of the tricky that he's thinking in his mind. Because if you say the new election, all the 70 high level, most of them were coming from very old days. They will have chance to run for election. There will be a problem with the new parliamentarian. And maybe at that time he will say, no, this is not a new election. This is just a repeat election, and we do not. They will not be able to go there. And, of course, Erdogan, I think, is thinking that he will do something during this period and be able to get the majority in the parliament. It may. We do not. I don't know, because it's very difficult to really make any guess this time. And because he thinks that some people that voted for HDP, they were worried that they will not be able to pass 10%. But now they may say that, well, they already at 13%. I do not need to support that. All other way around, we do not know. But we are in a very, very critical situation. I do agree with that. And we do not know how this will come out. But the one thing, of course, we have to work very hard, because we lost many things in our country. We need structural reform, as you have mentioned before. And economy is the one in very fragile situation. If we do not be able, any government, coalition government or minority government, to deal with the economic issue, I think there will be a terrible situation in the country, because unemployment, the exports, of course, and the foreign investment, all this thing will affect it. This is why I think many circle in and outside of the country very much want to see the coalition between AKP and Republican People's Party, the two grand coalition. But the supporter of CHP very much opposing that from the down. Maybe in the top they may think of it, but I think it will be very, very difficult to do that, because how they are going to resolve the problems they were mentioned during the campaign. But I do know that from outside and from inside, there is very much, let's say, the kind of support for grand coalition. But we'll see.
Okay. Right, I can take three.
I just want to add one thing. First of all, technically, I think they passed a law in the last few weeks of the parliament, whereby if you got a paycheck once, you actually do get paid for the rest of your life. So that may take care of that problem, number one. Number two, the objections, I mean, Minister Çetin's point is well taken. You see, the other side of the coin, the presidency will be a troublemaker. The only way to deal with it is to strengthen the parliament. Our parliament has been hollowed out and has lost all its power as a legislature worthy of its name. What this election results give us the opportunity for is to actually make the assembly work and deal with all these contentious issues such as corruption probes by itself. In that way, it will elevate itself, it will strengthen itself, and you really don't need the government for that. You can pass a number of laws, they can be vetoed, but you can just send them back. So long as the other three parties can find common ground on specific issues to work together. And do not forget the last point. When the new interior security law was being passed down their throat of the deputies, the HDP and MHP deputies fought together against the AKP deputies. Unheard of, unseen before.
A gentleman at the back asked me what was Mr. Cameron's model for negotiation. Now, I regret to say Mr. Cameron's not asked me directly for my advice, so this is informed guesswork. But immigration, by immigration, I mean not directly free movement of labour, but an end to free access to benefits. And it is worth bearing in mind that of the four famous freedoms, I mean, free movement of services, for example, is highly qualified to our frustration, especially in countries like Germany. So, I mean, we've all got a right there's no absolutes here, but it's not free movement of labour, it's free movement of people who've decided they're not going to work, and free access to benefits. Red tape, I mean, I can't tell you how frustrated I used to get in all the departments I was Secretary of State, about completely unnecessary, burdensome regulation, which arose from poor drafting and decisions of the European Court of Justice in Luxembourg. But the Working Time Directive, for example, has produced virtually no benefit at a huge cost to the British taxpayer and disrupted our National Health Service. Now, I'm in favour of us staying in the NHS, but you can't ignore this as an issue. Or the chemical regulations. I could speak for the next 2 hours on aspects of the chemical regulations which are unnecessarily disrupting or have the potential to disrupt important firms in my former constituency. So you've got that. You've also got the issue of sort of creeping competencies. And all I just say to Quentin, I mean, because we'll be voting on the same side when there is a referendum, is this. I don't think. I mean, I'm sanguine about the result. I'm not sanguine about the consequences of a no vote. However, what I do believe is that most European countries understand that were there to be a no vote here, this would be very disruptive for the whole of Europe, because there are anti-EU parties across Europe, including in Germany, and it would set up a dynamic. And my disagreement with Quentin is ultimately we have to accept what the people decide. And you can't just forever have an elite project, which is the reason we've got this crisis, without having its legitimacy renewed.
Okay, we're slightly running out of time, and I'm going to take two last groups of three. And the first group of three is... No? Okay. At the back. Hello, you had a question? Yes, one there.
And here also.
Sorry, this is a short question for our Turkish friends. Sorry, I'm Helopik from the Institute for Strategic Dialogue. Short question for our Turkish friends, short question for Quentin. On Turkey, curiously, there has been very little reference, certainly in the British press, about the role of the Gulen movement during the election campaign. And it wasn't mentioned.
The role of...
Gülen movement.
Oh, the Gülen movement.
Good, was it? And it wasn't mentioned tonight either. I'm rather curious what role they have played, what role you expect them to play.
Okay.
Quentin, the question is very brief. Obviously, immigration would be a huge factor in a negotiation with Turkey for Britain, but would it not also be a factor for the other countries of Europe? I think when you look at the country the size of Turkey, free movement of people becomes a question for everyone, not just the British. Would you agree with that or not?
Thank you. And this gentleman there.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I want to say something about Turkey.
Well, we prefer a question, really.
Yes. My question, actually, at the same time, Turkey is not going to be changed anything at all. I think nobody realizes Erdogan is a crazy man. He do everything what he can in his power. He's not going to lose his power. Even he admitted he's going to go to civil war. A few weeks back, before the election, he said parliamentary system is out of date, on waiting room. When we need it, we can use it. If I don't need it, I don't use it. Don't estimate him. He's a dictator. He doesn't want to give his power away. That's one thing. Even he face it, go to the civil war. I believe that. That's one thing. About Europe, United Kingdom, yes, we cannot do without Europe. That's I believe. But we want to be in Europe, but we don't want to be run by Europe. That's my philosophy. I think David Cameron, he announced it. He's going to the referendum. He shoot his own foot. I think he's done it wrong. This country cannot do without Europe because trading partner, about 60%, we do business with Europe. It's very difficult. We have to think twice before we say something. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, good evening. My name's Michael Daventry. I'm a journalist. I'm also the editor of JamesInTurkey.com. Mr. Özel has actually touched on it briefly, but I wonder if the rest of the panel could expand. These memoirs that were published today in Turkey by the longtime aide of Abdullah Gül are actually quite revelatory. And I won't take everybody's time up by going through them in extensive detail, but they are, I guess, the equivalent of a longtime aide of Gordon Brown publishing his memoirs right now, just as the Labour Party is picking its new leader. So my question for the rest of the panel is, if you have met Mr. Gül and you feel you know him on a personal basis, can you comment or possibly even speculate on what role Mr. Gül will be playing in Turkish politics in the months and weeks to come?
Okay, thank you. If we could do those questions quickly now, and then we'll have one very quick round, and I will use my position to cut people off who ask long questions. Right. So who would like to... the first question was the Gülen movement, I think.
Sorry.
Okay, fine. Well, the story about the Gülen movement, if you want me to put it very simply, is first, they are of a different branch of Islamist movement than the national view from which Mr. Erdogan emanated. There was a triangular power structure. The two of them ganged up on the military and crushed it. And as happens, then the two of them got on each other's throats. The Gülen movement has been extraordinarily successful in the educational field. They have recruited a lot of poor but intelligent children. They have gotten them good education. They have an educational empire around the world, akin to the 19th century missionary schools of Americans or others. Their darker side was their involvement in the Turkish security services and the judiciary. And on that, they have been attacked very furiously since the corruption probes were made public by the government. And they cannot find any real allies on that particular ground, although they are being defended in terms of media freedom and their right to invest wherever they want and all that. We have discovered in the past 3 elections that they do not really count all that much quantitatively. That is, they don't command millions of votes. But they're a resilient movement. They will have a place in the future of the country. And I would not be surprised if they were helpful to part of the MHP gains because that's the only party with which they would have a common interest. They would not work with either the Kurds or the CHP.
Thank you very much. Abdullah Gül and... yes, please.
I do regard Abdullah Gül as a friend, as a man for whom I've got a very high regard, but I'm afraid I'm sorry to disappoint you. I'm not going to offer speculation about what he's going to do. It's a matter for him. Thank you.
Very quickly to Hella on immigration. What I was trying to do was not say that the others aren't also nervous about the prospects for free movement after Turkey joins the European Union. What I'm pointing at is that the British have shifted their position very significantly on the whole prospect of future enlargement in Europe by putting their opposition to freedom of movement so high on the agenda. And that, I think, is a very real shift and a very dangerous one.
Thanks very much. Right, okay, we're going to have one last round. Oh, one there.
Hi, this is a question for Soli Özel. Just to pick up on your last question, on one of your remarks, sorry. You mentioned the fact that a weak government will make President Erdogan a source of instability, whereas I thought that a weak government will make President Erdogan the stronger hand, will give President Erdogan a stronger hand. He built the presidential apparatus. Already his advisor on foreign relations, Professor Kalin, runs a lot of the foreign policy. So just your remarks on that type of governance from the new presidential apparatus. And the last question to Mr. Çetin and yourself about the Middle East policy of the new government.
Can I immediately respond? I may have misspoken or I may have been misunderstood. Okay, go ahead, let's take it.
Julian, if it's a quick one.
Thank you very much, David. Julian Hornsmith, businessman. My question is for the two Brits on the table, since you've had such an easy time. Tell me, do you think, in the light of our experience, that coalitions are toxic for the smaller party? What advice would you give the smaller party in Turkey?
Lastly, go hand the back.
İlhan Nebioğlu, I'm a banker here in London. As we're speaking about coalitions and foreign policy has been a subject, many people forget here that His Excellency Hikmet Çetin, when he was the foreign minister in 1990s, 91, 95, I presume, Turkey was with the environment in such a messy situation. Russia had disintegrated, there was Armenian-Azerbaijan war, Balkans was the biggest disaster, and you very wisely put such a fantastic performance during that time as a foreign minister under a coalition government that we have not lost any friends. I think that should be a lesson.
Okay. Who's going to take the first?
The point I made was not a weak government versus the presidency. What I said, I think what I said, it was that the presidency, in my judgment, would be a major source of instability in the country. Strong government or weak government doesn't matter. As for Mr. Cullen running a foreign policy, there is a foreign policy.
Well, I think the foreign policy, Middle East policy, what kind of government we're going to have, whether any kind of coalition, whatever it is, but I think there will be change in the foreign policy because the three opposition party, all three of them, there's very, very much agreement in one issue. That the Syrian policy is wrong policy, the Middle East policy is very bad policy, and they do not agree with relation with, for example, Egypt, Syria, Israel. And I think even if they've been in the government, there will be change in foreign policy, no doubt, in a good way. This I'm sure for that. And because public opinion is very much disagree with the policy. And for example, the region, in the southeast region, Gaziantep, Urfa, all this area, they are not terrible. We have 2 million refugees now in Turkey. And 100,000 baby born in Turkey. No education, no school, no health care. And now they're all over the country now, in Istanbul, in Izmir, everywhere. No job, no education, nothing. And I think the people are very much aware of it. And this is why I think that will be change in foreign policy with any government that we are waiting for. It will be change, no doubt.
Okay, Brits on mine.
Well,
thank you very much.
Jack is a much wiser man than I on the subject of coalitions, although I have spent the last 4 years living in Germany, where coalition government is a much more familiar concept. It's nonetheless a very difficult one always, I think, for the junior party. I saw the Liberals in Germany virtually melt down after they'd been in government with Frau Merkel. But I think we are condemned to coalitions for the foreseeable future. How many parties have we in Parliament now, Jack? 10. There are not going to be, even with the British first past the post system, we are not going to have constantly one-party governments any longer.
Yes, I think we have a one-party government at the moment, but remember that its majority is very small by historic standards. And in a way, you can see in Britain what's happened in India, where they have a first-past-the-post electoral system, but because of geographical and ethnic fracturing, you have to have coalitions, and to a degree, that's what could happen here. Coalitions, Julian, are inherently risky for the junior partner, but the crucial reason why the Liberals destroyed themselves was not the fact of coalition, but the fact of some of the decisions they made within that coalition, of which the decision to go along with trebling tuition fees when they had, as it were, carved in stone their promise to abolish tuition fees was lethal. From that moment on, they were, I'm afraid, toast. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much. Well, clearly, if our two governments, the governments of the United Kingdom and the governments of Turkey, follow the policy advice of our distinguished panellists, both countries' futures will be infinitely more rosier than I suspect any of us actually expect. It's been a very stimulating discussion. Thank you all very much indeed. I'm not for a moment going to sum up, but I would like you all, if you would, join me in congratulating and thanking our panellists. Thank you very much.